Table flipping is not just for movies. Jesus did it too. He flipped over tables in the temple courts. Let's read about it in John chapter 2, 13 through 16. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." The outer court was the only place in the temple where Gentiles, or non-Jewish people, and women who were not making sacrifices were allowed. It was the only place in the temple where they could pray. It was also often where the sick and poor would go for help. The money changers and sellers of sacrificial animals had a right to be there. They were providing a service to worshipers, particularly those who came from a long distance and didn't have an animal with them to sacrifice. But they took more than their fair share of the space, changing the character of the court. And they took advantage of people by charging too much. Jesus flipped the tables because the supposed religiousness providing for the sacrifices and the temple tax was getting in the way of people's true worship and stopping people from being drawn to God. Instead of being attracted to God, Gentiles coming into the outer court would be distracted by the marketplace and dealings going on there. John shows us that Jesus wasn't willing to tolerate anything that distracted people from worshiping his Father. However, Jesus wasn't famous for flipping tables or righteous anger. He was known for love. He taught his disciples that real tolerance looks like his Father's love. Let's read what Paul wrote to the church in Ephesus about Jesus' teaching. We'll read Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. The Greek word Paul used here for walk isn't about getting out and getting some exercise. He's talking about the way you live or direct your life. Because of Jesus' example, we are called to walk in love. This is real tolerance. Christians are often accused of being intolerant. Sometimes this accusation is deserved. Other times it comes from a misunderstanding of what we teach. Our fifth doctrine is an example. It says, "We believe that our first parents were created in a state of innocency, but by their disobedience they lost their purity and happiness, and that in consequence of their fall all men have become sinners, totally depraved, and as such are justly exposed to the wrath of God." Teaching about sin seems intolerant. No one likes to have their sin pointed out. But it isn't loving to ignore the truth that everyone has a soul and that choices have eternal consequences. That's why even though we respect or tolerate other people's choices, we also feel compelled to speak the truth of the gospel message respectfully and with love. Let's look at an example of how Jesus did this. Let's read John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." The law said that both parties caught in an adulterous relationship should be sentenced to death. Here we only see the woman. This likely means she was set up, since she was the only one standing there waiting to be condemned. The religious leaders were trying to catch Jesus in a trap. They wanted him to sentence her to death, showing that he didn't actually live out the message of love he preached. But if he didn't sentence her to death, he would show he didn't obey God's law and didn't have authority over these matters. So what did Jesus do? He embarrassed the leaders by suggesting that anyone who had not sinned could start the execution. They eventually all left. Jesus then told the woman to leave her life of sin. This is tolerance lived out in love. He didn't condemn her, but he also didn't tolerate the ongoing sin. This order matters. We show our love to others so they can see who Jesus is. Only then do we teach what to do next. If we face people with the attitude of, "You're wrong, let's talk about it," nobody is going to listen. We need to be at the table to be in conversation, and we have to be in the conversation to hear and be heard. Tolerance is hearing and being heard. When we know who we are, loved by God and made in His image, we are not threatened by those who are different from us. We can walk in the way of love.